Yo, welcome back to the channel. Kamusta po sa inyong lahat? Prydwen tier list has always been a contentious topic in the Wuthering Waves community. Not because it's irrelevant, but because it's influential. A lot of players still look at their tier lists when deciding who to pull, who to build, and what direction their accounts should go. And that's exactly why the conversation around them has gotten so heated because depending on who you ask, their latest tier lists are either completely out of touch or actually one of the most useful things they've ever made. Recently, they shifted away from the standard performance based rankings and moved into a value based system. So instead of asking how strong a character is, they're trying to answer a different question. Is this character worth it for your account? And that shift alone is what sparked all the recent drama. Now, before we go deeper, let's quickly clarify why Prydwen even matters in the first place. Prydwen is basically a third party hub that provides guides, tier lists, and general information for gacha games like Wuthering Waves. It's not official, but it's widely used. A lot of players treat it as a reference point, especially newer players who just want quick answers. And that last part is important because this new system is very clearly designed with newer players in mind. If you're a beginner, you're not thinking about optimal rotations, frame data, or perfect team executions. You're asking much simpler questions. Should I pull? Who will help my account the most? Who is the safest to invest in? And from that perspective, a value based tier list actually makes a lot of sense. It tries to simplify the decision making process into something more practical. Instead of telling you who does the most damage in a vacuum, it tries to guide you towards characters that are generally useful across multiple situations. And that's where the defense of this system comes from. Because for a new player, flexibility matters more than protection. Ease of use matters more than peak performance, and long term usefulness matters more than niche optimization. So when you look at their tier list through that lens, a lot of their decisions start to make more sense. Characters that are easy to use, flexible in teams, and don't require perfect setup naturally rise in value. Characters that are strong but restrictive or require specific teammates drop down. And honestly, that logic is not wrong. The problem is how that logic is applied. Because the moment you move from theory into actual execution, things start getting messy like the upcoming anniversary patch. Looking for cheaper than in-game top-ups? Follow my U7 buy link down in the description and pinned comments for massive up to 27% discounts on your next wuwa top-up. They offer two safe and guaranteed top-up systems with their trusted direct top-up where you only need to provide your UID and server, and for even more savings, you can opt for their trusted login top-up. Both options are safe, secure, and guaranteed. Check my link down in the description or pinned comment and use my code VeeDizzy for an extra 5% off your first purchase. This is a safe and secure way to save on your top-ups while supporting the channel. Always spend responsibly. Now, back to the video. Okay, let's talk about the biggest issue with value as a concept. Value is not universal, its account is specific. Two players can look at the same character and get completely different value depending on what they already own. Their supports, weapons, teams, even play styles all change how valuable a character is. So when a tier list tries to generalize that into one ranking, it has to make assumptions. And Prydwen makes a lot of them. For example, signature weapons are included in their ratings. That means characters are judged as if they already have their best gear. Now, from a new player perspective, this kind of makes sense. It shows the full potential of a character and what you're aiming for long term. But at the same time, it also creates a disconnect because most players, especially newer ones, don't actually have those weapons. So now the tier list is showing you an ideal version of a character, not the version you're realistically using, and that's where the confusion starts creeping in. Take a character like Lupa. She's rated very high in value, and from a broad perspective, that checks out. She's strong, she enables teams, and she has a clear role in monofusion teams. But her actual value still depends on who you pair her with. If you don't have the right teammates, her impact drops. So now we run into a contradiction. The system is trying to simplify decisions for new players, but the actual value of the character still depends on context. And that context isn't always communicated clearly. Another example is flexibility. The tier list clearly values characters that can work in multiple teams. And again, for beginners, that's a very reasonable approach. A flexible character like Frollo, for example, gives you more room to experiment and build your roster over time. But then you look at characters that are locked into specific partners. Logically, those should be less valuable because they limit your option. Yet, some of them are still ranked very high. So now you have two ideas happening at the same time. Flexibility increases value, but restriction doesn't always decrease it. And that inconsistency is what frustrates more experienced players. Now, let's talk about the expert factor, because this is where the philosophy really splits the community. The tier list suggests that some characters become more valuable if you play them better. From a beginner's perspective, this actually makes sense. It's basically saying this character has a higher skill ceiling, and if you're not comfortable with their mechanics yet, you might not get full value out of them. That's useful information if you're still learning the game. But from a more experienced perspective, this feels misplaced because that's not really value, that's performance scaling. And mixing those two ideas together makes the rankings harder to interpret. Now, here's where things get interesting. In other games, similar tier lists often assume that players will eventually learn how to play characters properly. So characters are rated closer to their full potential. But in Wuthering Waves, this system leans more towards accessibility. It assumes that not everyone is going to play perfectly and it adjusts value based on that. And depending on who you are, that's either helpful or incredibly frustrating. If you're a newer player, it feels realistic. If you're an experienced player, it feels limiting. And that difference in perspective is exactly why this topic is so debated. Finally, let's talk about why the overall list feels so compressed. A lot of characters end up being labeled as low value with only a few standing out at the top. From one angle, this reflects efficiency. Not every character is equally impactful when resources are limited. But from another angle, it feels like the system is undervaluing too much of the roster. Because in actual gameplay, many of these characters perform perfectly fine. So again, we were stuck between two interpretations. Is the tier list being realistic about investment value or is it being too harsh in its ranking? And the answer probably depends on your experience level. And that brings us back to the main point. This isn't just about whether the tier list is right or wrong, it's about who the tier list is for. For newer players who want direction and simple answers, the system actually provides a useful framework. But for experienced players who care about optimization and nuances, it feels inconsistent and sometimes misleading. So the reason Prydwen has become so controversial isn't because they're completely wrong. It's because they're trying to serve two very different audiences at the same time, and that creates friction. So if you're looking at their tier list, trying to decide who to pull, the best thing you can do is understand what perspective they're really coming from. Use them as a starting point, not a final answer. Because at the end of the day, the most valuable characters for your account is still the one that fits your account, not just the one that ranks the highest on any chart. Wuthering Waves is moving into its second year, and that naturally changes the player base. The people who started at launch have learned the system, tested teams, and built enough experience that they don't need to rely on sites like Prydwen as much anymore. At the same time, there's a constant wave of new players coming in, and for them, the game is still confusing. They don't have the context yet. They don't know which investments pay off long term or which characters are harder to make work. That's the audience Prydwen is clearly targeting now. So when veteran players look at these tier lists, they can feel a bit surface level, not because they're completely wrong, but because experienced players are already thinking several steps ahead. They're factoring in team synergies, optimization, and edge cases that generalized lists simply can't capture. But from Prydwen's perspective, trying to account for every single variable would make the system unusable, unsustainable. There are just too many moving parts to create a perfectly objective ranking that works for everyone. So instead, they simplified it. They prioritize clarity over precision, even if that means losing some nuance along the way. And that's really what this comes down to. If you're a newer player, this approach is helpful. It gives you direction without overwhelming you. But if you're a more experienced player, you've probably outgrown it. And that's okay because at some point, every player transitions from following tier lists to understanding the game well enough to question them. And it seems like Prydwen understand that shift too. As always, if this video resonated with you, please leave a like and subscribe. Ring that bell for massive gotcha luck and maybe a sandwich. Thank you so much for watching. Maraming salamat po. And I will see you in my next video drop. Goodbye.